All right, let's jump right into it. Today, we're diving deep into the Lithium Triangle.
The heart of the lithium boom.
Exactly, that South American region that's got, well, over half of the world's known lithium reserves. That stuff that's in pretty much every battery we use these days.
Yeah, smartphones, laptops, and especially electric vehicles. Big topic.
Huge. And we're going beyond just the tech side of things. We're going to look at all sorts of sources, news reports, analyses from the experts, even getting into how these lithium batteries are actually made.
The whole picture, really trying to get a grip on just how big this lithium rush is and what it means for the Lithium Triangle and everyone living there.
Definitely a lot to unpack. Okay, so for those who might not be totally up to speed, what exactly are we talking about when we say the Lithium Triangle?
So geographically speaking, it's this kind of triangle-shaped area, right?
Right.
Parts of Argentina, Bolivia, and Chile all come together.
Gotcha.
And the landscape is, well, it's pretty unique. Picture these massive salt flats, almost like something out of a sci-fi movie.
I've seen pictures. It's pretty wild.
And underneath all that salt, that's where you find the lithium, in this super salty water called brine. But here's the thing. Getting that lithium out, not exactly a walk in the park, the whole process.
Yeah, I've heard it takes a ton of water, which is kind of ironic, right? We're trying to go green with EVs, but need a resource that's already scarce in these desert-like areas.
Totally. The way they do it now, this evaporation method, it can take like over a year just to get enough lithium for a single EV battery. And the water usage, you're looking at over 1,000 gallons of brine per battery.
Wow, that's a serious amount of water.
Yeah.
So what about all this talk about new tech like direct lithium extraction? That's DLE for short. Could that be the answer?
DLE definitely has a lot of potential. Imagine like filtering out specific minerals from salt water, but on a massive scale.
Sounds complicated.
Oh, it is. And we haven't really figured out how to make it work efficiently and safely enough to really meet global demand. Not yet, at least.
So for now, it's back to the traditional methods. Which brings us to Chile, the current lithium king, right? They're exporting almost $1 billion worth of lithium carbonate every year. That's enough brine to fill an Olympic swimming pool every 20 minutes. That's insane.
Chile is definitely in a lead right now, and they've attracted a lot of investment from overseas to make it happen. But there's a flip side to all this success.
What do you mean?
Well, there are growing worries about what this is doing to the environment. All that water usage puts a huge strain on the region. Plus, there's the potential damage to these, well, pretty fragile ecosystems.
Right, and it's not just about the environment, right? We've heard from some indigenous communities too, people like Jorge Munoz Coca. They're concerned about whether they're actually benefiting from this lithium boom or if it's just, another case of their resources being exploited.
Definitely a valid concern. True sustainability has to look beyond just the environment. It has to include the people who live in these areas, their well-being, their right to decide what happens on their land.
Absolutely. Okay, so then we have Argentina, right? They're really rolling out the red carpet for foreign investors, offering tax cuts and incentives to get more mining operations going. Sounds like they want to be the next big lithium player.
They definitely see an opportunity. But Argentina is facing a lot of the same challenges as Chile.
Like what?
Like the worries about the environment, especially with water. And there's a lot of concern about whether those profits from the lithium will actually stay in the region or just flow back to those foreign companies.
Right, right.
I was reading about this guy, Carlos. He's a local resident. And he's actively trying to block some of these mining projects. He's seen what happened in the past. Big companies coming in, taking resources, and leaving very little behind for the locals.
Doesn't want to see it happen again.
I can understand why people are skeptical. Sounds like a tough balancing act, trying to grow the economy while making sure everyone benefits in a way that's sustainable in the long run.
Exactly. It's a recurring theme. And it's going to come up again as we move on to Bolivia. Ah, Bolivia, the country with the largest lithium reserves in the world. But from what I've read, they're having a tough time getting things off the ground. What's going on there?
Well, it's kind of complicated. They have the potential to be like the lithium superpower, right?
Right.
But they've got these hurdles, some technological, some political, holding them back. So unlike Chile and Argentina, who are all about foreign investment, Bolivia did something different back in 2008.
What was that?
They nationalized their lithium reserves.
Yeah.
Basically, the government took control.
Interesting.
Now, that's made some international companies a little hesitant to get involved.
Makes sense. So it's not just about who has the lithium, but also about who controls it and ultimately who profits from it.
Exactly. And that's where things get even more interesting because you've got these global powers like China and the U.S. all watching very closely. They all want to make sure they have access to this, increasingly important resource.
So we're talking about more than just mining here. This is getting into geopolitics, global power dynamics. Okay, well, before we get too deep into that, let's go back to Bolivia for a minute. They've had these high hopes for, a lithium-fueled economic boom. But we've also heard stories like Antonia Cabrera's.
Right.
She was expecting, big improvements for her community, but those haven't really materialized.
Yeah, Bolivia's had its share of setbacks. They just don't have the same kind of infrastructure and technical know-how that you see in Chile or Argentina, at least not yet.
Yeah.
So scaling up production has been a real struggle.
So what's the latest? I know they've recently signed some deals with Chinese and Russian companies. Does that mean things are finally starting to look up for Bolivia's lithium industry?
Well, it could be a turning point, but there are definitely some concerns. I was reading about Abdon Morales. He used to be a community liaison for the lithium company there.
Oh, wow.
He's worried about the lack of transparency surrounding these deals.
Yeah.
What are the terms? What about the potential environmental impact, especially water depletion? Those are big questions.
Yeah, it's a lot to consider. You want the investment to boost the economy, but you have to do it in a way that's sustainable and benefits the Bolivian people, right?
You got it. That's the challenge, not just for Bolivia, but for the entire Lithium Triangle, really for the whole world as we try to figure out this clean energy transition.
So we've seen how this lithium rush is playing out differently in each country. But one thing that keeps coming up over and over is water. Seems like you can't talk about lithium without talking about water.
Yeah, it's the big issue, right? You need huge amounts of water to extract the lithium. And we're talking about places that are already pretty dry, facing water scarcity, even without the mining.
Right. So you're putting even more pressure on the environment, on ecosystems that are already fragile, agriculture, even just access to drinking water for people. That's a real concern.
Absolutely. It's a big impact. And it's not something we can ignore. I mean, we need lithium for the clean energy transition. But the process of getting it out of the ground, it's definitely having some unintended consequences.
So are there any ways to make it more sustainable, like less water intensive?
There are definitely people working on it. A lot of research and development going on. Like in Argentina, some companies are experimenting with new technologies, trying to reduce the water usage, recycling more of it, that kind of thing.
That's good to hear, but it sounds like it's still early days for those new approaches. So in the meantime, what can we do to protect these vulnerable ecosystems?
I mean, stronger environmental regulations are a big part of it. Governments have to step up, set stricter limits on how much water these mining operations can use. They got to enforce environmental impact assessments, make sure the companies are actually doing what they say they're doing in terms of operating sustainably.
Yeah, we've heard from some communities that are, well, let's just say they're skeptical. They've seen how mining has impacted their environment in the past. Makes you wonder if regulations alone are really enough.
That's true. Building trust is super important too. These mining companies, they need to be talking to the communities, really listening to their concerns. And not just listening, but involving them in the decisions, making sure everyone's on the same page. Transparency is key.
That brings up another question, sort of a bigger picture thing. Who's actually benefiting from all of this? Like, we've heard from indigenous groups who are worried they're not seeing the benefits of the resources being taken from their land.
Yeah, the whole question of who profits from this lithium boom, that's a big one. It's about making sure those benefits are distributed fairly. Because, honestly, we've seen this story before, right? Foreign companies coming in, extracting resources, making profits that go out of the region, while the local communities are left with the environmental and social costs. That can't be the model going forward.
So how do we break that cycle? How do we ensure that the people living in the Lithium Triangle are the ones who really benefit from this boom?
Well, one idea that's been floated around is forming a lithium cartel, kind of like OPEC, the organization that controls oil production.
Oh, wow. A lithium cartel. That's pretty bold. How would that even work?
Basically, the idea is that the Lithium Triangle countries would team up, work together to have more control over the lithium market. They could set limits on how much lithium gets produced, influence the prices, maybe even generate more revenue from the resources that way.
Sounds good in theory, but are there downsides?
Oh, for sure. I mean, cartels are notoriously hard to manage. You need a lot of cooperation, a lot of trust between countries. And, let's be honest, they don't always have the same interests. Plus, there's always a risk that trying to manipulate the market could backfire. Prices could get too volatile, maybe even slow down the growth of the electric vehicle industry. It's a gamble.
High stakes for sure. And let's not forget about the geopolitical side of all of this. We already talked about China investing heavily in the region. How does that play into this whole lithium cartel idea?
China's definitely a major factor. They've been very strategic about it, investing in lithium mining and processing, securing access to the lithium they need for their own EV market, which is, exploding right now.
Yeah, it's like a new kind of resource race. Countries competing for control of this, well, pretty essential ingredient for the future.
It is, and the U.S. is taking notice. They're worried about relying too much on China for lithium, so they're looking for ways to secure their own supplies. The whole other layer of complexity on top of everything else.
We've covered a lot of ground, from like the environmental impact of extracting lithium to the economic challenges, the whole idea of benefit sharing, and now the geopolitics, the global power dynamics. It feels like the Lithium Triangle is right at the center of so many huge global issues.
It really is. It's a microcosm of, well, the big challenges we're facing in the 21st century. How do we balance the need for clean energy with protecting the environment? How do we make sure economic development benefits everyone? How do we create a system that's fair and just, not just for some, but for all?
It's a lot to wrap your head around, and honestly, it's a little overwhelming.
It is complex.
Yeah.
But that's why it's so important to talk about it, to understand what's at stake. Because what happens in the Lithium Triangle, it's not just going to stay there. It's going to have ripple effects across the globe. It's going to impact the future of clean energy, the lives of millions of people.
It's pretty clear the Lithium Triangle is under a lot of pressure, right? I mean, the demand for lithium is just going to keep going up as the world moves toward, electric vehicles and renewable energy. The question is, how do we make sure this transition doesn't end up hurting the environment and the people living in these regions?
Yeah, that's the big one, isn't it? The million-dollar question. It's tough. There's no easy answer. But I think we have to start by recognizing that this isn't just a local issue. It's global. So we need global solutions. We can't just keep doing things the way we always have, with companies coming in, extracting resources, and leaving behind all the damage and disruption. That model's got to change.
So what does a more sustainable model look like? What's the alternative?
Well, for starters, it means bringing local communities to the table, involving them in every step of the way, from the very beginning, when they're first exploring and planning a project, all the way through to making sure they share in the benefits. And of course, protecting the environment has to be a top priority. Investing in technologies that minimize the impact, that's key.
We've talked about some of those technologies, like those water-efficient extraction methods, but like you said, a lot of that stuff is still in the early stages.
It is. Innovation is going to be crucial here. We need more research, more development, not just for new ways to get the lithium out of the ground, but also for alternatives to lithium-ion batteries. Maybe there's something else out there that could reduce our dependence on lithium altogether.
That's an interesting thought. We get so focused on lithium, but maybe we need to think outside the box a little bit.
Absolutely. We got to keep our minds open, explore all the options. And it's not just about the tech either. It's about changing how we think about stuff. We're so used to this throwaway culture. We need to move towards a more circular economy where resources are used more efficiently, reused, recycled.
And that brings up another point. We as consumers, we have a role to play too, right? I mean, it's our demand for the latest gadgets, electric cars, all these lithium-powered devices that's driving this whole rush. What can we do to be more responsible?
Be more aware, for one thing, like where are the products you're buying coming from? What are the real costs, environmental and social, associated with them? We can support companies that are doing things the right way, advocate for stronger environmental regulations, and think about the choices you're making. What are you buying? How are you disposing of things? Those little things add up.
It's about being informed and realizing that, yeah, our individual choices, they actually matter in the grand scheme of things.
Right. Every time you buy something, you're kind of voting for the kind of world you want to live in.
Well, this deep dive has definitely been eye-opening. It's way more than just batteries and electric cars, that's for sure. It's water, ecosystems, communities, global politics. It's about the future of the planet, really.
It shows you how interconnected everything is, right? Even something as simple as the phone in your pocket, it's tied to this whole complex global system. And it's a wake-up call.
Yeah.
We all need to be more informed, more involved, more responsible.
It's been a really fascinating journey. Thanks for walking us through it all.
My pleasure. Hopefully it sparked some curiosity, giving you some things to think about.
And to our listeners, if you want to dig deeper, we've got a bunch of resources linked in the show notes. And remember, the decisions we make today, they have a big impact on the world we'll be living in tomorrow. So keep asking questions, keep learning, and keep diving deep. We'll see you next time.